Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lieutenant Stephen Rogers here at the Patriot Desk in the United States of America. It is 7 p.m. on the East Coast. Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight. This is the night, Thursday nights, where we address many of the issues that are impacting those of us in freedom-loving countries around the world, including the United States of America. But there seems to be a country, a population of people who are coming to the rescue of everyone. The country is Canada, and the people are Canadians. The impact that they've had on freedom-loving people around the world, on how to address many issues that are in relation to the government taking away their rights has been absolutely astounding. I asked my crew last Thursday to give us an idea as to where people are viewing our broadcast on Thursday night. So they made a short list, and a lot of Canadians who have written me and contacted me have asked if they really are having impact on anyone other than the Americans and themselves in Canada. Well, how about this, folks? Last week and weeks prior to that, and I'm sure we're going to see some of this tonight, residents, people, citizens from Sweden, Switzerland, Australia, Italy, South Africa, all 50 states of the United States, obviously all the provinces in Canada, Lithuania, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Iceland, Finland, and a few others. Now, think about this. Why are they tuning in? Because they are all in similar situations in their countries in relation to their governments trying to take complete control of their lives. Now, I have a distinguished guest tonight. I've got to tell you, I talked to him earlier. I've had communication via emails with his lovely, lovely wife, Carol. I mean, you talk about two individuals that love God, that love country. And I know those of you in Canada are so proud that this individual is certainly a distinguished gentleman. And when I say gentleman, I mean gentleman who is in your country. So I'd like to introduce to you the Honorable Brian Peckford. He is the former Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. And by the way, I do apologize to him. I did earlier. I actually promoted him to Prime Minister when I was talking about him last week and during the week advertising. And I've got to tell you, you talk about getting emails. I mean, I've got emails this high saying, yes, that's the man that should be the prime minister. So he's beloved. He's beloved by the Canadians. And that was from 1979 to 1989. But here's something exciting, something that you all in Canada have that I'd love to have here in the United States. He's the only living first minister who helped craft the 1982 Constitution Act, which is the Canadian Charter and Rights and Freedoms located. I mean, folks, I've got to tell you, it's like me sitting next to John Adams or Benjamin Franklin. And although, those guys were writers and signatories of our Constitution, I mean, that's the value I put on this gentleman's life. Without any further ado, my honor to introduce to you a gentleman and a fine Canadian patriot and a patriot of freedom-loving people around the world, the Honorable Brian Pickford. Mr. Pickford, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, sir, for having me. I really appreciate it, and I thank you very much for the introduction.
Well, it's an introduction well-deserved and well-earned, and I'll share this with you. The Canadians all over your country and those around the world, freedom-loving people, are anxious to hear from you tonight. So I'm going to ask you to begin with. I can't imagine how John Adams and Ben Franklin and the signatories of our Constitution would feel today if they were here. So you're here. You're living in this present time. You were part of building a great Charter of Acts in your country. So can you share with our audience, take all the time you want, on how you feel today and how the heck did we get where we are in Canada right now?
Well, first of all, thanks again for having me and for all the Canadians who listen to your program. It's a pleasure indeed and a distinct honor to be here. As you said, I was a First Minister or Premier of a province of Canada. Premiers of provinces are like governors of the states. The only real difference is Canada and the United States are both federal states. The provinces overall have more power than do the states of the United States. You'd never say it today, though, when you see governors like Ron DeSantis and the governor of South Dakota and so on exercise the powers that they have and the influence they have as governors in this pandemic era, where they are really coming forward and preaching and defending freedom and rights of individuals, whereas we're not doing it in Canada to the same degree the premiers are not. However, during my day, we often did. The premiers of Canada during my day in the 1980s, we very often exercised our provincial rights and our rights of individuals and so on that we're not doing today. There's been a lack of leadership. But in any case, where we are today in Canada, as 10 provinces, one federal government, and 3 territories, by the way. There's 3 territories: Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, all in the northern part of Canada, and they are less than provinces. So it's the provinces and the federal government that determine the Constitution. And this is what happened back in 1981-82. For your listeners, both in Canada and the United States, they should recognize, first of all, that unlike the United States of America, Canada did not have a written Bill of Rights when we formed the country. In your country, you were formed in 1776, and in 1791, there was an amendment which allowed for or saw to it that you had a Bill of Rights. In Canada, we became a country in 1867, and we didn't have a written Bill of Rights until 1981-82. That's the difference. You had one in 15 years. Ours was 114 years in the making, if you will. So from the time we were formed as a country in 1867 until 1981, we were governed, like the United Kingdom, by common law, unwritten British common law and customs that had grown up. In other words, if a Canadian had a particular problem as it related to individual rights and freedoms, and they wanted to litigate it in the courts, the lawyers would have to look to any precedents that were set by British common law or by custom or convention over the period since we were a country. But there was always the feeling in Canada that we needed a written Bill of Rights, which we now call the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so over the years, especially in 1960, 1970, 1980, and so on, there was quite a push by people in politics, in the governments of either the provinces or the federal government, to try to get a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But one of the stumbling blocks was there was one problem. We still had, for the change our Constitution, to go to London. The final arbiter of whether we got changes to our Constitution was in London. And then we had to decide that if we were going to change our Constitution, would we then also, in that same Constitution, make sure that in future we didn't have to amend our Constitution back in London, but could do it in Canada. And that was called patriation. So what 81-82 was about was bringing the Constitution back to Canada, so we were not 90% sovereign, but 100% sovereign, was to ensure that in the future our Constitution was amended in Canada, that we were completely sovereign, had no more reference back to London, which was, of course, the mother country. We did not have a revolution like in the United States. And so we became a country through a Statute of Westminster, which formed Canada, called the BNA Act, the British North America Act in 1867. But I say, without a Bill of Rights. So in 1981-82, when we started negotiating, we were negotiating two big things. One was to ensure that we became completely sovereign after this went through, which was called patriation. And secondly, that we had a Bill of Rights or a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so the negotiations began and it took 17 months. Like I say, there were many attempts earlier to try to do this, but one of the stumbling blocks was not only trying to make ourselves completely sovereign, but what would be the amending formula into the future as to how we would amend our Constitution now that we were going to do it in Canada. And that was one of the big stumbling blocks. But we got over that when we did the 81-82 thing. And so we developed a negotiating process which led to a stalemate, court action by the provinces against the federal government because they walked away from the table, and then they lost in the court. Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the father of the present Prime Minister of Canada, lost in the Supreme Court because he tried to unilaterally do what he couldn't do. And he lost. We challenged him, and the Supreme Court of Canada ruled you can't do it on your own. This is a federal state. There are powers in the provinces, powers in the federal government. And when you affect the powers of the provinces, you have to involve them in any change. And so he came back to the table, and we finally negotiated repatriation, bringing the Constitution home to Canada, and secondly, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We had a final 3-day make or break session after those 17 months and after that court action. And on the night of the second day, I made a proposal to all the provinces to try to break the impasse, because there was no movement on the first day, no movement on the second day. So the night of the second day, I presented a proposal which the provinces said had a really good chance to succeed. We made some amendments on the night of the 4th of November, the second day, and that proposal went forward the next day, and with some more amendments was accepted as the new Constitution Act of 1982, in which there was the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So I come at this, as you asked me earlier about how do I feel very sad. I feel angry some days I feel very sad, because here, after 114 years, we were getting a written Bill of Rights, freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, for freedom to assemble, freedom to associate, life, liberty, and security of the person, freedom to travel around Canada or to leave Canada. All of the major elements of any Bill of Rights was in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so I feel sad some days, because what has happened is that when the pandemic came on, or the so-called pandemic came on, governments really, as they did in most parts of the Western world, if not the whole world, panicked. And they became very fearful, either manufactured or real, about this, because I was the Imperial College of London that first announced that we were going to have millions of people on the streets dead because of this virus. And then later it was the University of Washington in Seattle that were making these kinds of pronouncements. All, of course, were wrong. And so governments panicked and overreacted and brought in a whole bunch of measures, mandates, both provincially, federally, and territorially. All the 14 governments of Canada, the 10 provinces, the federal government, and the 3 territories, almost in unison. It almost looked like it was all manufactured or planned by somebody. And anyway, those measures that they brought in violated that sacred Charter of Rights and Freedoms that I was a part of and that I helped craft. And so when this began to happen, and I saw it with my own eyes and could see it all around me, I suddenly, of course, came out of retirement, if you will, going on in my 80th year, and said, this is wrong. This can't stand. And meanwhile, the governments were going on, we can do this because we did just declare emergency. So in an emergency, we can do anything. And so I began to make noises, both in where I live now, which is British Columbia, by the way, the westernmost part of Canada. And I was born and raised and was premier in the easternmost part of Canada. And so I started to raise a lot of questions about this. And of course, then other people started to raise questions about it. And so I did public meetings, and I do a lot of meetings. I've done over 100 right now. Done over 100 of these, both in person and by internet. And because the government brought in one mandate, the federal government, that unvaccinated people couldn't travel, we're the only country in the world right now where their citizens cannot travel within their own country if they're unvaccinated. The only country that's doing this right now. So this will tell you the enormity and severity of the issues that we face in Canada. And then all the provinces brought in varying degrees of mandates. Very severe on the places you could go, places you couldn't go, masks you had to wear just about everywhere, and so on, all violating the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
I'd like to, if I may, I want to pick up on something you just said, because there are thousands of Americans watching tonight, very, very concerned, getting educated. We had no idea some of the things you're sharing with us went on. And boy, I'll tell you, you've given us quite an education. But you just said something that's alarming, that in Canada, you can't go from one end of the country to the other without being vaccinated. Now we've heard that happening in communist countries, but I've never heard that happen in a free country. So when you say you're the only free country in the world, you mean it.
Yes, exactly. Not only every free country, every country in the world. Totalitarian, authoritarian, communist states or whatever. We're the only place in the world right now where Canadians can't travel within their own country if they're not vaccinated. In other words, I live in British Columbia. The next province for me is Alberta. I can't fly to Alberta. If I want to go to Alberta, I have to drive in my own car, or I can't take the train, okay? Or I can't take a boat if it's longer than 24 hours. So there you go. Here we are in Canada. That's a federal mandate. Now we've got a whole bunch of provincial mandates right across the nation as well, which are very draconian as well. Some of them have been lifted in some provinces. Some of the others are coming off gradually. But the travel mandate is still there. And it's so bad in Canada right now, in my own home country, of which I was one of the first ministers, that as I got into this, sir, and as I start speaking out publicly and going to public meetings, by the way, all of my meetings have been overflowing. In other words, there are people outside everywhere I went. So far, everybody's been starving for this information as just what's happening to our country. I decided, because I was talking the talk, and I was waiting for somebody to say, Mr. Peckford, we remember you, or if they were older, thank you for coming forward. You're talking the talk, but how about walking the walk? And so before anybody had a chance to really pose that question to me, I filed a lawsuit against the federal government of Canada myself, against the federal mandate of travel. And that's in the courts right now. And I have 5 other people from across Canada who joined me in this lawsuit, all of them having unique or different negative effects because of the travel mandate. One person, for example, of the 5 is a businessman. He has a business in Southern Ontario, and he has part of his business in Yellowknife in Northwest Territories. Well, he used to fly back and forth. You can know how far apart that is, Southern Ontario and Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories. And so he can't conduct his business unless he flies. He can't drive from Southern Ontario to Yellowknife to conduct his business. Others who have been hurt because of family, because of wanting to leave the country, because somebody was dying, belonged to them. So when I launched this lawsuit, I was getting lots of emails and lots of phone calls and requests to speak. It just mushroomed. And so I was up to like getting hundreds a day, hundreds and hundreds of emails a day and phone calls with people very, very happy that I launched this lawsuit against the federal government. And even today, I'm getting phone calls every single day from people who are being hurt by this travel mandate. And so the situation is right now that, and then we had the truckers' convoy that happened. And then I was able to, by, what shall I say, certain means, because I couldn't travel, but I was able to get to Ottawa to speak on Parliament Hill as part of that truckers' convoy. And the lawyer who's representing the truckers' convoy also represents me, which is quite interesting. And so I know a lot about what went on in Ottawa and how the government tried to frame and the police to bring charges against people who using a news report as evidence. Police using a news report as evidence. That's never done. You need real concrete evidence to put somebody in charge. And the lady who was in charge of the truckers' convoy was arrested and put in jail. And early on, they couldn't sort of find a charge against her of terrorism or violence or anything like that. So they used the term mischief. And then she's a lady, 5 feet tall, short lady, wonderful person, and her husband. And anyway, they put her in jail. And then when they had a bail hearing for her, this is the most egregious part that Americans will never understand, let alone Canadians. When she was brought to court, she was brought to court in shackles. For what? She was still innocent. I thought in the charter, And in all of Western democracies, you're innocent until proven guilty. She was just going for a bail hearing. She's a female, 5 feet tall. And they put shackles on her to come into the court. Most Canadians had never heard of that before, unless you were a murderer who was extremely violent, even in those kinds of settings. And then who did she appear before? She appeared before a judge who had been a candidate for Mr. Trudeau's party in a previous election and who lost. And one of the rewards she got was to be appointed a judge because she was a lawyer. So here was the leader of the truckers' convoy appearing in shackles before a conflict of interest judge, a judge who was in deep conflict of interest because she was obviously prejudiced towards the Liberal Party, which is the party of Justin Trudeau in the House of Commons and in the Parliament of Canada today. So that's how far Canada's democracy has fallen and why I'm so vehement in my opposition to what's going on.
I've got to tell you, I've got another news feed here, and there's a lot of Americans are responding, and they're shocked. They're absolutely shocked. I'm looking at some of this stuff, and this is why I've said, sir, is that, America has problems, obviously, at our southern border, but the real serious national security problem to us is what's happening on our northern border. Because I see, at least in my view, I see a communist influence. I mean, we're talking communism here. I mean, a woman in shackles, that a nonviolent situation. I understand that, and Americans need to know this. Maybe we could talk about this a little too. Pastors being arrested, clergymen and women who were praying at the convoy. Is that a fact?
That is a fact. Quite a few pastors, especially in Western Canada, in Alberta. Some of them are still in jail. Some of them are out on bail for trying to worship because they restricted your ability to worship. And some pastors said, no, our charter rights are protected here, and we intend to continue to have services, Christian services. And they did, and they got arrested and put in jail and treated very badly, like put in very bad jail kind of circumstances and so on. So yes, it's amazing what the governments of this country, both provincially and federally, have gotten away with in the last 2 years. Hopefully some justice will come, but I have to tell you that the lower courts in Canada, especially at the provincial level so far, have ruled against the charter and have ruled in favor of the government. Now, the higher courts haven't ruled yet anywhere. The appeal courts haven't ruled anywhere yet. And that's where I'm going with my case. But, we're in serious situation because if the appeal courts take the same route as the lower courts took, then our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which we fought so hard for after 114 years and put in place, me being one of the authors of it, that it doesn't speak well for our democracy. And if over the next year or two, when these court cases are solved by the appeal courts, if they don't rule against the lower courts, then your northern neighbor will no longer be a democracy.
A couple of questions people have asked me here. One is in relation to where are the other members of Parliament? Where are they? I mean, really? I mean, I'm saying this because we know here we have senators that some of them are kind of crazy, but that's okay. I mean, they'll come out vehemently and oppose a violation of people's rights, but we haven't heard much from members. We've heard as the citizens, but where are they? Where are the members of your Parliament?
Yeah, well, one of the big problems is all of the first ministers have passed away who were with me in 1981, 82, and I'm the last one. But there are a lot of other ministers of the provinces or of the federal government that are still alive. They're older like me, but they're still alive, and they've remained silent. All of the former prime ministers, there's 4 prime ministers still alive. Brian Mulroney, Stephen Harper, Jean Chrétien, and Paul Martin are still alive. And not one of them have spoken up to defend the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, most of them are in some kind of consulting capacity. They've gone on, as you know, in the United States, it happens too, when a lot of these senators and others retire from the Parliament, they get other jobs with law firms or consulting companies doing consulting work and making a lot of money. Well, that's why it seems like it's happened in this case. These former prime ministers are keeping very quiet. And I know a lot of Canadians are asking the question, why? And of course, one has to answer that obviously they have other fish to fry, if you will, and are not willing to come forward and defend their country in the way that I'm doing it. And of course, like I said, others who were at that constitutional conference in 81, 82. Besides which, all of the law schools in Canada, all of the law schools, there's only a few lawyers that have come out there. Canadians who contact me almost every day. They can't get a lawyer, especially in the smaller provinces, because what's happened? The governments have had them on retainer. So they'd be in a conflict of interest if they took an individual's case as it related to the charter. And, you know, smaller provinces, there's smaller law firms, not as many lawyers. And so most of them are already preempted from working on behalf of a charter case, which is a very tragic, sad situation. And I've had to help people out by writing letters for them and sending them to them, telling them what parts of the charter that the government is violating if they're losing their jobs as a nurse, or as a nursing assistant, or even as a doctor for that matter, and other workers in the hospitals, other workers in the schools, right? And so I've been helping these people so that they can go to their employer and say, I want you to understand, and sometimes they even bring my letter with my name signed to it, saying, look, the last father of the charter here, the last first minister, is saying that by doing this, you are breaking you're breaking the laws of the country. You're breaking the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I've had some success, but very often they just just contemptibly look at that person and say, you don't know what you're talking about. And so it's a very sad situation.
Well, it leads me to the other question. I'm thinking if one of the signatories of our Constitution were alive and they were brought before a court, how does any judge anywhere, all right, when they ask you the question, and I'm sure it's going to come up, you're the only living person on the planet that could answer this question with regard to your rights. What was your intent? Now, an intent, as you know, is big in court. So now you're going to explain the intent of the signatories. How do they dispute that?
Well, exactly. And there's a really good question you just asked, because there is a provision in the charter which says you can override these individual rights and freedoms. But the intent of that section was this: if the country was in peril, if it was an insurrection, if it was a war, not if it was a virus from which over 99% of the population recover, or less than the fatality rate of 1%. So that section 1 doesn't apply. And I can't wait. And that's part of my court case, that the intent of that section in the Constitution does not apply in this case. And by the way, even if it did apply in a war and an insurrection, there are 4 tests that have to be met, which the governments have not met. So even if somebody tried to argue that, yes, this section 1 does apply, the tests that are in that section, none of the governments have been able to meet, and yet they've gone ahead and imposed all of these draconian measures. So by any count, the governments are violating the Constitution. And so that's why I'm speaking up so strongly on this, is because, I happen to know what I'm talking about, because I was there and I know what happened. And so, like you say, I'm waiting for the judge to ask me. And I've written, by the way, I do a lot of writing every day. And so I do a lot of writing on this. So I have many, many essays explaining all of this. And that all of those are out public on my blog. And so everybody in Canada is becoming aware of what I'm saying. And now I'm getting quite a few people, of course, listening to me. And when I explain it the way I just did, which is quite logical, quite reasonable, quite sensible. Like, for example, one of the conditions of the 4 tests that they would have to meet, even if that section did apply, was demonstrably demonstrate. Demonstrably justify is the 2 words, the verb in that sentence, okay, in that section 1. No government has demonstrably justified what they are doing. In other words, prove to me that the benefit is greater than the cost. That's what demonstrably justify means. No government has done that. Not one of the 14. And yet they brought in all these mandates. So they have not a lot of justification for what they're doing. There's no logic to what they're doing. And then on the science side, as you and I know, the science is overwhelming against it. The cure is worse than the disease. Yes. We actually had a professor here in Canada that nobody knows about. at Simon Fraser University, a respected university in British Columbia, do a study back in April 2021 of 80 studies already done around the world. His name is Douglas Allen, Professor Douglas Allen, and he did this study of 80 studies around the world to see what was going on, right? Because he suspected that there was a lot of information out there which showed that the cure was worse than the disease. And he concluded from those 80 studies that yes, the cure was worse than the disease. But not only that, he said this. He said, we knew 90 to 100 days after the pandemic started that the data was already in a few countries. And it was quite obvious that the way they were going about this, the governments were going, was wrong, completely wrong. And then they ignored the Great Barrington Declaration and all the rest that came later than Douglas Allen's report. And guess what? The mainstream media never carried his report, even though he made it public. They never, ever carried it to this day. There was only one paper that carried it 3 or 4 months later, and that was the Epoch Times. And they carried it, the Epoch Times carried it to say, here was the Epoch Times story. Nobody has carried Mr. Allen's report. That was their study. That was their, their story on it. And so that's the sadness of it all, is that we have the four, I call them the four horsemen of the apocalypse.
Yes.
Right? You've got the big government, you got the big pharma, you got the big tech, and you got the big media, all conspiring with the government to stop this information from being part of the public and then propagating a narrative which is mythology, which is not true.
Well, there, my friend, but we have the big movement. And with leaders like you, I've got to tell you. Now to the Americans watching, I've got to tell you, now, do you know when we say it could happen here? Do you know why we're saying that? Sir, I'm really stunned over what's happening in Canada. It seems like it happened overnight. I mean, so this was a progression. I always say the pandemic gave birth to another disease called communism.
Yes.
And it's frightening what's happening across our northern border. So the question I'm getting from a lot of people, I know you're getting a lot of mail like I am. A lot of Canadians are upset. They're very depressed. They're distressed over the direction the country's going in. They're concerned about their children and their grandchildren. And they're asking the question, I'm looking at this feed here and this feed here. And a lot of questions are, what do we do? We're frustrated. We have no leaders. The only leader speaking up is Mr. Peckford. Now, here in America, we're doing what we can. And one of the greatest things that we're able to do, thank God, is to get information like this out, because it's going all over the place now. And I think it's going to grow. And because of leaders like you, we're able to do that. But what do you say to the frustrated patriots in your country?
Yes, well, just let me do a little backdrop. See, we don't have a Senator Cruz. We don't have a Governor DeSantis that's come out. In other words, we don't have a premier like Governor DeSantis. We don't.
Hey, we got a leader called Brian Pickford, for goodness sakes. Those guys can't shine your shoes. You're kidding me?
In any case, here's what Canadians can do. First of all, they can support people like me in my lawsuit, which a lot of them are doing, because I'm doing it through a organization which just depends upon contributions. It's called the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. All of their revenue just comes from individuals, okay? And they take on cases, and they took on my case. So 4 or 5 lawyers in that organization are doing it, and they contracted an outside lawyer to act as lead lawyer for me, somebody who had done a lot of litigation before in the Supreme Courts, in the higher courts of the land. So I have a very good legal team. And of course, at the end of the day, they're all going to have to be paid. And if I lose at the end of the day, right up to the Supreme Court of Canada, then they will cover however much they raised, and I'll have to cover the difference, whatever that happens to be.
1 minute. Here's what I'd like you to do, okay? This is where we could really play a role to help you. During the week, tomorrow, send me the link to wherever the money's going to go, okay? Yep. We've got tens of thousands, thousands of people who are involved with our organization. So we'll post your link, and we'll send it out in an email, and we'll encourage people to give. We will do that. That's my commitment to you.
Thank you, sir, very much. And we'll do that this afternoon. My wife will do that this afternoon, and we'll get that to you, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. The other thing Canadians can do is get involved in various organizations that are opposing what's happening in Canada. I'm chairman of one called Taking Back Our Freedoms. So they just go in online, Taking Back Our Freedoms, and they'll see my face and a whole bunch of other doctors and scientists who are part of the board, and we're fighting against it. There's three or four other organizations. Another one is called Action for Canada, Action number 4 for Canada. And then there's Canadian COVID Care Alliance, which is another one. Vaccine Choice Canada is another one. So there's 4 organizations, and a lot of Canadians are familiar with these, but don't just be familiar. Pick up the phone or email these people, find out where the chapter is in your province, and join and start getting actively involved. We're going to have to do civil disobedience on a significant scale that we've never done before in Canada if we're to turn this around. We can't leave it to others. Others have let us down. The Parliament of Canada has let us down. All the parliaments of the provinces have let us down. The people now have to speak. It's now back to the people, where, of course, it always should have been. The Parliament is out of touch in Ottawa with Canadians, and most of the power has shifted to the Prime Minister's office. We're almost a republic and have a president without ever changing the Constitution. We've ignored our Parliament. We've allowed the Parliament to become weak and the Prime Minister's office to become strong. And we've got to turn that around. But we can only do it at the individual level now. Our MPs and our other representatives have let us down. So we need these organizations to be robust and strong. And then once the politicians and the courts see that the people are no longer on their side, we think we can make a big difference and turn it around. But, you know, right now it's at best a 50-50 proposition. We need more people to be part of all these organizations and to support court cases that are opposing what the government is doing.
Please send me also the list of those organizations so that we could get to your citizens.
Yes.
I'm sure a lot of them are now saying, boy, I'll tell you, we'd like to know more about it. Or if you have a website, you'd be more than glad to let people know. And, you know, you hit the nail on the head. We're believers. I know you are in the power of prayer. We believe that there's a God above. The gifts of freedom and liberty were from him, not from any government, so no man could take it away. But I remember a pastor once telling me years ago, you know what, there, Lieutenant, there's a time to pray and there's a time to fight. Now's the time to fight. We fight within the framework of the law. And
when you put the two of those together.
There you go. And we put our faith to work within the framework of the law, and we win and they lose.
Now, just let me say one more thing that Americans will be very, very interested in, and Canadians will be very interested in. The beginning of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which the courts so far, listen to this, have ignored. This is unbelievable. This perhaps is the greatest sin of all the ones I just mentioned. Perhaps this is the greatest sin. We knew what we were doing when we were writing this only 40 years ago, okay? The beginning of our charter says the following: whereas this country is founded upon the principle of the supremacy of God and the rule of law, everything else comes after. Wow. The courts have, can you believe it, brazenly ignored the introduction to our charter. It is part of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So when you talk about prayer and when you talk about morality, it's in our charter. The supremacy of God and the rule of law are supposed to guide all the interpretations of the charter, and the courts so far have ignored that.
Well, they better not ignore God when he speaks on this issue. They're going to have some troubles. But I've got to tell you, one of the bright lights that are coming out of what we're seeing, you know, I've always said that man's disappointments are God's appointments. And one of the greatest appointments I see here is an incredible historical bonding between the American people and the Canadian people, between American patriots and Canadian patriots. And it's so interesting what we're seeing unfold in Canada. But again, I might sound like a broken record, but I have to emphasize how the people in Canada have been and continue to respond to this. It's extraordinary.
Yes.
And now we're beginning to see the fruits of the labor of that, because now more Americans every day are saying, whoa, wait a minute. You know, we're hearing about the problems we have on the southern border, which we are dealing with, but we're not hearing much about what's happening north, and now we are. And you know, there's a difference between a Mexican flag crossing the border and a communist flag crossing the border. Exactly. We want the Canadian flag to cross the border, no other flag.
Exactly.
So the fruits of
Exactly.
your labor are paying
The other
off.
thing you'll be interested in, and I know you've got to go, but the other thing you'll be interested in, besides the supremacy of God and rule of law, which is in our charter, is this: of all of the public meetings I have had so far, and they had to be close at home because I can't travel. 80% of them have been in churches. They have donated their space to me to allow to speak on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And most of those churches have been fundamentalist churches, because these fundamentalist churches and their adherents are teaching every day from the Bible and from Christianity the persecution of the early Christians after Jesus. They do understand rights and freedoms because they know what early Christians went through in the first 200 years after Jesus. And it's amazing to see these Christian churches rally around the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It is unbelievable to behold.
Wow, what a great story! And the Trudeau government and communist leaders around the country, this is what they fear, right? They fear
That's
this.
what they fear.
This is what they fear. And I've said this, folks. We know out of the communist playbook, the first objective: take their God away, close down their churches, make sure that God disappears because their hope disappears. But you know what? This has emboldened us to move forward. So, sir, I don't know how to thank you. I will say this to you: you have my full, total commitment to help you any way I could. We have our problems here in America, and we're dealing with them. But I see this situation in Canada is a grave and clear and present danger to the American democracy, to our national security. And as time goes on, God doesn't make mistakes, does he?
No.
He never makes mistakes. And there's a spiritual reason why all of this is going on, bringing us together. And I have nothing but great hopes. And, that president behind me, Ronald Reagan, when he campaigned, he talked about mourning in America. Well, we're going to have mourning in America again, but we're going to have mourning in Canada also.
Canada.
I don't mean mourning as if we're sad. I mean, the sun's coming up, folks.
The sun is going to come up again.
Any last words, my friend, before you leave?
No, only thank you very, very much for having me on. I really appreciate it, so that I can both talk to Canadians and Americans at the same time. And I look forward to sending you my contact information so that you can post it for me. And I really thank you for that. And I ask Canadians from coast to coast to coast in Canada to get involved with these various organizations that we talked about. And civil disobedience will win the day.
Well, you know what, sir? Thank your wife for all of us. She's been very kind, and she's worked on pulling all this together. And boy, I'll tell you, you know what, God, I pray that He blesses you. But you know what? You're a blessing from God Almighty. Believe me. And I told you before we went on the air, you're doing God's work. Thank you so much, sir, and I salute you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, what can I say other than, the Lord really blesses all of us when we hear an individual with his background and the work that he has done. So he needs your help. He needs all of our help. We're doing a lot of work here in the United States with regard to a situation we had on January 6th in Washington. We're doing a lot of work with regard to the situation in Ukraine and Russia and our economy and on and on and on. But like I said, a major focus of at least our attention here now, and it's spreading around the country, the United States, is the clear and present danger to our national security north of the United States, which is in Canada, brought to us by who? By a Trudeau government and individuals like him who are embracing the ideology of Marx, Lenin, and Stalin. But be blessed, Canadians, be blessed. Thank God you got a leader like that gentleman there, Brian Peckford, because he's a lighthouse standing tall, and he needs your help. And I know he'll get your help based on what we're hearing and seeing. It's incredible. He's going to get our help. So look forward to this, folks. We're going to get the information that he is going to send us. We're going to be sending out a lot of information within the next several weeks. We're growing in leaps and bounds here, and we're trying to figure out how we're going to get all this done. We just have volunteers here, but they're good. They're working hard night and day. But we'll get all this information out to you. And the way we get it out to you is this. You see where on the blue banner on the bottom of me here, it says campaignforamerica.com. Now, this is important. If that's our website, go to our website. You'll see a contact bar and just your name and email. That's it. All right. That's all we're looking for. We're going to take your name and email, and we're going to store it, and we're going to add it to our distribution list. So when you get the information from us, it'll be via emails we send out. Now, a lot of people said that they didn't get some of our emails. Look in your spam folders, junk folders, and trash folders. Sometimes they end up in there. And if you don't get them after a while, just email us again, and we'll figure a way to get them to you. What you heard tonight across the United States, around the world, in some of these countries I spoke about, and in Canada, share. They can't stop this right now. You see, this is, and I'm sure some of the communists, if you will, the Trudeau people who embrace that ideology, I'm sure they're watching. Well, I've got a message for them. In fact, I'm going to say to them right now, I'm going to look in their eyes, and I got a message for you. You know, at the end of the day, history is on the side of freedom-loving people. Every single tyrant that came out of nowhere and began to decide that they were going to be king or queen, or that they were going to be the leader of all the people, and that the people were going to be enslaved to them, all of them, from the Garden of Eden to the end of the story, all of them were sent back to the trash bin of history, the ash bin of history. And that's where you're going to end up. And if you think communism and the communists of whether they're in Canada and the United States are going to stop, they're going to stop at my door, they're going to stop at somebody else's door, and they're going to enslave people. No, they're not going to stop at our doors. They're not just going to stop at our neighborhoods. They're not going to stop in our states and provinces. They're going to be coming for you. Believe me, communism doesn't discriminate. They will come for you. The people who gave birth to a communist ideology in Canada and the United States and anywhere on this planet, they will come for you. So the mainstream media, wake up, your days are numbered. Those who support communism around this world, and especially now in Canada, and trying to get a foothold in the United States, they're going to come for you eventually. But at the end of the day, listen to what I said. All of you who supported them, they're all gone and you're all gone. Guess who's standing? We, the people. Let freedom ring. God bless you. See you next Thursday night here when we talk a little bit more and a lot more about what's going on in Canada. And of course, Monday night, we address issues that are very, very critical here in the United States. So campaign to number4america.com. Share. The whole world is watching. There are a lot of countries. I just gave you a small list, but they're watching and they're thanking God that we have leaders like Mr. Peckford and people like the wonderful people here in the United States of America and Canada and freedom-loving people around the world who are willing to do this, who are willing to speak in the same sentence, God and country. Have a great evening. God bless you all. I'm Lieutenant Stephen Rogers.